in terms of designing habitat for birds, habitat should include kind of meet the needs of birds. And at the most basic, the needs of birds are food, water, and shelter. But so that sounds pretty basic, but in practice, that gets complicated because birds have very different food, shelter, and water requirements. Different species of birds have subtly different food, water, and shelter requirements. So some birds, this is a figure in the grasslands region, actually, across Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba. Some birds like the McCown's longspur, burrowing aloe, they actually require short, sparse grass. Even overgrazed grass is good for their habitat requirements. Other birds, like the Baird's sparrow, things like that, they require Sprague's pipit. They require nice, tall, dense grass for their nesting and to complete their life cycles. And other birds like to have little trees and shrubs, and full-grown mature trees and shrubs as well. So they really have very different needs, and so different habitats will support different kinds of birds for sure. And it gets even more confusing because some of these birds, they require certain habitats to nest in, and then certain habitats to forage in. So, I mean, the sharp-tailed grouse will maybe nest in under trees and shrubs or burrow there in the winter, but then they'll form their leks, their mating dance rituals, and they'll need very open areas, very sparse grass. So yeah, you really need a diversity of habitat covers to provide for this diversity of birds, and it gets kind of confusing. Like, how do you create and manage niches for so many different species? What should you do, really? Like, there's so many things to consider. And what I recommend for your habitat design is, rather than trying to focus really specifically on getting all these different species in, focus on these 3 principles to follow, and then you won't be able to go wrong for the most part. So first, focusing on diversity. So first, diversity in plant species. So trying to get a diversity in there in terms of fruit and seed type available and period available, flowering period, coniferous, deciduous diversity, height, width, shape, age. So many different species in there will support many different species of birds in turn. And yeah, there's been studies to show that more bird diversity in mixedwood forest in the Aspen Parkland. This is more than you would expect, even just by summing up and putting together the species that like coniferous forest. So mixedwood forest implies both coniferous trees like spruce and deciduous trees like aspen. This study shows that it's more than the sum of its parts. It's more than just conifer species birds and the aspen species birds. You get, by having them mixed in together, you get additional species on top of that. It's almost like synergistic effects. So get diversity in there as much as possible. And then diversity in structure too. So rather than having a single layer canopy or something like that, where everything is aged the same, having mix of tall trees, short trees, shrubs in there, having that kind of mixture is really useful for providing basically different apartments or townhouses for different species to live in, and different species to find food sources around. And then thinking about your horizontal diversity as well. So vertical diversity in terms of structure of the canopy, horizontal diversity in terms of structure of the forest. So yeah, the forest has, it's mimicking a wild stand, which is not evenly spaced trees across the landscape. It doesn't have straight edged patches or something like that if you're making clearings or doing some harvesting of timber. Instead, it's variable with openings. There's clearings in there, but it's not all consistent. There's some areas of denser trees, some areas of sparser trees. And so, yeah, again, you're providing that kind of habitat heterogeneity, that difference for different species. Second principle to follow would be native species. So again, native animals are adapted to native plants. Talked about this for in other instances as well, for example, for pollinators as well. This is the same thing. And native ecosystems tend to be more diverse because there's more niches within them. They have evolved to complement each other over a longer period of time. So one species is less likely to become completely dominant. And this is true. Native animals are adapted to native plants. Both the birds are adapted to the plants, but also to the native plants for their life cycles. But also the plants are also able to support a higher diversity of insects that are adapted to them, that live on them, and those provide maybe food for the birds. And so yeah, so just having that having native species to the extent possible can just support a more diverse native plant community. And there's some species within there that are really, really particular about having, for example, the Baird sparrow having native grasses to nest in. It won't be able to utilize other non-native grasses with nearly the same success. Or actually, there was one study that showed they had lower rates of nesting, particularly nesting success. So they try to nest in the non-native grasses, but their nest wouldn't turn out as well. And the Alberta Native Plant Council website has a list of native plant nurseries in Alberta. So if you're looking for where you can get native species in Alberta, go to their website, download its next big Excel spreadsheet where you can find find hopefully native plants within your area. And they also have vendors in Saskatchewan and Manitoba as well. So then we connected from continental to local scales. So this is kind of the third principle. So larger habitat patches equals more bird diversity. You just have more genetic diversity. You have more different species that are possible, and certain species do require a fairly large territory to complete their life cycle. Certain species like chickadees and things like that are not nearly as demanding on territory sides, but larger species do require patches of unbroken forest, larger patches of unbroken forest. And so, yeah, the extent to which you can create these large habitat patches is ideal, or connect them together, so it makes it easy for birds to move between these different packet patches. And then also many of these birds migrate as well. They travel across continents to be in Alberta and elsewhere around us. So there's been initiatives to try to provide continuous areas where they have like regular wetlands that are in healthy condition that can provide stopovers for these migratory birds as they go. The Prairie Pothole Project is one example of that. Yes, 3 to 5 billion birds fly from Canada's boreal forest to the Americas each year. This crazy migration, and they need places to stop and find food and have shelter to hunker down. That's a big trip.